Hey there, it's time for another Ask Me Anything session with yours truly, your friendly neighborhood book editor. I'm excited to answer your questions today about writing books and publishing them, so we have some great things on deck to chat about. To get some housekeeping out of the way, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and go ahead and hit that like button while you're at it for the YouTube algorithm. I also have a free resource in the description below called My Story Self-Assessment that I designed specifically for my YouTube viewers to help them take their stories to the next level. I know how hard self-editing and self-revising can be, so I hope that helps you out. It's also going to sign you up for my newsletter where I provide exclusive tips and insights not currently available on my channel, so you don't want to miss out on that. All right, without further ado, let's dive into the first question. Hey, what's the best way to structure your query letter and how do you segue into the pitch/blurb? So I have a whole video that goes into paragraph by paragraph what your query letter should include. So I'm going to link that in the description. Make sure to go ahead and follow that pretty much. I'll give you a quick overview. The first paragraph is going to be ideally a personalization line if you can personalize your query authentically to the agent. And it's going to include a brief snapshot of your genre, title, and word count. Second paragraph to, about the fifth or sixth paragraph is going to be your plot blurb. Now, the segue between is something I see a lot of writers get hung up on. You think that you need this transition language like my story is about. You really don't. I know it feels weird because you want to write it like a formal email, but really just go right into the plot blurb. Like, Jane Doe started school on Monday. Like, just go right into it. I promise that's what literary agents expect. So then you're gonna have the plot blurb. After that is where I like to put the comparable titles. Some people put it up front. I like putting it after the plot blurb because it gives more context for your comparable titles because the agent has an idea of what your story is about at that point. And it also gives you a little bit more space to talk about the story's themes, etc. So that's where I like the comparable titles paragraph, then your bio paragraph, then your sign off. That's pretty much the query letter structure in a nutshell. Next question here, it's a two-part question. Is it okay to reference real restaurants and hotels in your book? Or is it better to not give them names or make up names for these places? I want my fiction story to be realistic. My understanding is that there's not really any issue with using real locations or restaurants or places in the book, and many works of contemporary fiction do that. If you are going to work with a publisher versus self-publish, they are definitely going to highlight any of these potential issues down the line when you're going through copy editing and line editing, so I wouldn't worry too much about it, especially if you are going down the path of working with a publisher, because they would highlight any potential issues, but I've never come across any issues where you have to change these in my experience. The second part of the question, what is a standard formatting manual style for querying fiction books to US and Canadian literary agents like Chicago Manual of Style? To be honest, as long as your query letter and your novel are grammatically correct and your query letter really shouldn't have any typos. If there are a couple of typos in your manuscript draft that you aren't able to catch until later, that's really not the end of the world. But as long as all of your prose is grammatically correct, it doesn't matter what style you use, whether it's AP or Chicago. The literary agent is not going to care whether you use the Oxford comma or not. They're just going to want to see that you can write eloquently and that you have a grasp of the language and there's no glaring grammatical issues. Once your story is closer to being published and you're in that copy editing, line editing, proofreading phase, yes, you will have a style guide for your book, but you're gonna work on that with your copy editor, so you don't need to worry about that right now. Here's an interesting question. Do you think there will soon be agents/editors looking for books based on the pandemic in the middle grade age range? So I'm not an expert in middle grade particularly. I primarily work on adult fiction and a little bit of YA, but we are seeing the pandemic come up in adult fiction, which is really interesting. There have already been several books published in the adult space that are explicitly talking about the pandemic or explicitly set during the pandemic. So I could definitely see this applying to middle grade as well. But whenever we're talking about trends or where publishing is going or what publishers or literary agents are looking for, I always caution against trying to write for what you think the market or what you think the publishing industry wants. Pretty much every published author I know and any literary agent I know also gives the same advice. Don't write what you think is going to be trending or what you think literary agents or publishers are going to want. Write what you want to write, what you feel compelled to write. Write the story that is coming naturally and organically to you, that you feel compelled to tell. That's the most important at the end of the day, whether that's about the pandemic or not. If you want to write that pandemic story, do it. But don't do it just because you think it's going to increase your chances of getting published, because that's not the best way to approach this. All right, we have time for one more question. I saw your video on how to know if your ending sucks, and in that you mentioned you should tie up all loose ends. How do you balance saving plot threads for sequels versus having a satisfying ending? Do you have any tips there? This question comes up a lot, especially with authors who are planning a sequel or a full series and want to figure out how to end this first installment, which in most cases should be standalone, especially if you are trying to get a literary agent and get it traditionally published. So it's great that you're thinking about how to craft this ending effectively. When you're looking at this first installment, identify for yourself what is the main plot conflict, what is the main point of tension in this particular part of the story. Now, look at your ending. Does your ending resolve that plot conflict, the main plot conflict that we are following in this particular installment? So maybe this particular book is about the character's journey to reunite with their father. Well, do they reunite with their father, or do they find out their father is dead or whatever at the end of this book? Or are you pushing out that main plot conflict to the next book? The latter approach, where you haven't resolved the main conflict of this book, is where it gets tricky. I would say, ideally, for this first installment, you want to resolve the main plot conflict. And if there are other little bits and pieces, like maybe, a sub-character's journey that you didn't fully tie up, or there's another character you introduced, but there's more to come with that character, that can all be picked up in the next installment in the series. But you want the reader to feel like they got what they came for with this story. What you want to avoid is having them read through all the way to the end and then say, well, I don't know what I got out of that, because the main plot is still unresolved. I still haven't seen the character finish the journey that I've been following for 300 pages, right? So I would think about it in terms of the main conflict and then save any sub-conflicts potentially for the future installments. I hope you liked the questions today, and if you have any questions you'd like to ask me, please leave a comment here. This is the cue I use when I go through and answer the questions, and I'd love to know what's on your mind. As I mentioned earlier, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and don't forget your free story self-assessment waiting for you in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and happy writing.